Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to tear down the swivel hubs on my 80 series LandCruiser. I'll go through step by step on how to get everything apart, ready for new bearings, bushes and seals. This job's a bit dirty, but it's totally doable with the basic tools and some patience. So let's get started. Park the car on level ground and chock the wheels, then start jacking the car up. Once the car's jacked up, put under some jack stands for safety and security while you're working. Remove the dust cover from the wheel. Simply pulls off. I use an impact wrench to undo all the wheel nuts and then remove the wheel. This step is not necessary, but as I had new rotors to put on, I used my 17mm impact socket and undid the rotors from the hubs. To help remember where everything goes, I took a sheet of paper, taped it to the ground and put on the bolts and the sizes as I went. Next step is to undo the bolts for the brake calipers, and as you can see they're 17mm impact bolt. Removing the brake calipers was a bit of a task. This led to a whole brake rebuild which will come in another video as well. So obviously the pistons weren't retracting like they should do, which took a fair bit of effort to get the calipers off the rotors. I had to use a pry bar to get the caliper off the rotor. Once the caliper's off, use a coat hanger or a zip tie. I use some electrical wire to tie the caliper up so it's not in the way. Don't let it dangle by the brake hose as I've seen some people do. I used a pair of multi-grips to remove the dust cover. Come off pretty easily. I used a pair of snap ring pliers to remove the snap ring. Later on I found a better pair to use. This pair wasn't really suitable. Remove the 6 bolts holding on the flange. You should use a brass punch and a hammer on the head of the bolt to loosen the cone washers. I chose to use a piece of wood and a hammer on the side, but later on I also need to give a little tap straight on the flange and they come out quite easily. So no real drama with these. The biggest thing was they gripped around the thread of the bolt, so you can use a small screwdriver to pry apart the split that's in the cone washer. I gave each bolt a direct hit with the steel hammer, which released all the rest of the cone washer that didn't come out the first time. Now simply remove the drive shaft flange. I used a cold chisel and a hammer to flatten off the locking tab washer. Use a 54mm socket to undo the lock nut. Remove the lock nut and the lock washer as well. Then you've got one more lock nut to go. Same again, use the 54mm socket to undo the inner lock nut. Now remove the hub and rotor. Be careful as sometimes the wheel bearings will fall out on you as well. Now remove the 8 bolts, the dust seal, the dust cover and the gasket as well. Before removing the spindle from the axle knuckle, I remove the ABS sensor and put it out the road. You don't want to damage that as you remove the axle, that's all. Remove the top bearing cap and slowly pry it up so it comes out. Now remove the bottom knuckle arm, which holds the bottom bearing cap as well. Now I use the pry bar to pry the bottom bearing cap out, come out quite easily. I remove the tie rod end simply by removing the cotter pin and the castle nut, just with the impact wrench, so it gave you a bit more room to move. Now you can remove the spindle from the steering knuckle. It came out quite easily.
Yeah, that's what they're up.
Now you can remove the axle, but just remember this is the long axle, so it will be the heaviest. Remove the steel retainer holding the felt seal, rubber seal and the steel ring on behind the steering knuckle. Remove the top steering knuckle bearing. The bottom one fell out when I pulled it off. Now to remove the oil seal, I used a seal puller, but I did have a fair bit of trouble getting it out. As you can see, most of the outer ring tore, but eventually come out. You may have noticed there was not much grease in the steering knuckle at all. This is probably because the seal was leaking and washed all the grease out. So lucky I got onto this job.
That was good.
Now I remove the upper and lower bearing race in the steering knuckle. Simple round punch, moving side to side so it comes out evenly. Pretty simple and easy to do.
Come in closer then.
It's probably best to use a press to move the old bushing from the spindle. When I replaced it with a needle roller bearing and then the smaller bushing, which is an aftermarket product you can buy as well. So here I just used a socket on an extension bar, hit it with a hammer, and it did come out eventually, but a press would have been much easier.
Yeah, that looks impressive. Okay, stop.
I used some wheel bearing grease to grease the needle roller. This replaces part of the bush in the spindle. Otherwise you can replace it with a complete bush. Here I use a bearing install tool to press the bearing into the spindle, ready for putting it all back together. Now I install the brass bush. It was pretty easy to push in as well. Clean the old gasket off the spindle, and as you can see I applied Permatex when reinstalling the new gasket. I gave the surface a good clean with some brake clean as well. I'm just showing you here how to punch out the old bearings from the hub. I installed all new wheel bearings and seals and also put on new rotors as I was going. Now I remove the bearing race with a punch, working your way around slowly. You only need to undo these bolts if you're going to replace the rotors, which I did while I was going. As you can see, replacing the rotors would not be a simple job just by itself, so I thought I may as well do it while I'm going. Now I remove the hub from the rotor, and this is the last step in the disassembly process. With everything apart now, clean all the surfaces inside and outside, the swivel hub, the axle housing, the spindle, the back of the hub, and make sure no old gasket residue is remaining. Well, that's it for the teardown of the swivel hub. In the next video I'll show you how to put it all back together. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.